Hello, everybody. Welcome to Echoes of War. I'm joined here by my co-host, Gareth. How are you?
Hey Craig, ready for another Echoes of War episode? I certainly am for today's topic.
Yeah, this is going to be one of the most significant battles in history. It's a classic of the Napoleonic era, the Battle of Austerlitz. But before we jump right into it, I just want to let the audience know if you'd like to further support the channel, you can check out the YouTube membership over here at the Pacific War channel, if you're watching it on YouTube, that is. Or you can check out my Patreon account at www.patreon.com/the Pacific War channel. By joining either, you get access to the exclusive podcast series. You get early access to all the content I make and voting rights for the subjects I will tackle next. And the latest episode in the exclusive series is actually how the Sicilian Mafia aided the Allies during World War II, with a little hint of history of Lucky Luciano, just because I felt like throwing it in there. So it's a pretty fun episode. It's very out of the norm for me. And the source material was written by an actual mobster, so it's pretty wacky stuff. It's a lot of fun. But yeah. And this is going to be the second episode that acknowledges the fact that we are, in fact, on the Pacific War Channel on YouTube. And the reason why I'm bringing this up is probably 90% of you are listening to this on Spotify or another audio podcast platform. There's actually a large visual component to these episodes, and specifically for this one, it's going to be important. If you want to follow along with all the locations on the map, we're going to have multiple maps. We're going to be drawing upon them. We're going to be showing all the figures. You know, every single episode, we're going to really try to boost the visual component of this, but I am not going to fully edit these episodes like a documentary style because that will take ages, and we want to pump these out at least once a week. So this is kind of a good compromise. So just trying to entice you towards checking us out on YouTube. And that again is at the Pacific War Channel. But stating all of that, I thought, Gareth, before you start, I'll give a little introduction for the battle we have at hand, the Battle of
Feel free
Austerlitz.
to.
Yeah. It was fought on December the 2nd of 1805 and is often called the Battle of the Three Emperors. It's one of the most significant engagements of the Napoleonic Wars. The clash took place near, obviously, Austerlitz, which was in the Austrian Empire at the time. Today, that's Slakov-na-Brina in the Czech Republic. And it involved almost 160,000 troops. And, well, I won't give away how many were killed and wounded. Don't want to spoil it. It's widely regarded as one of Napoleon's greatest tactical triumphs. It's on par with the other legendary battles, such as Cannae and Gaugamela. So we're talking about Hannibal and Alexander the Great. Austerlitz secured a decisive victory for one of the sides, and it would change the course of history. I don't want to give away any more of the history afterwards. And for all the figures I will be talking about today during this podcast, I made sure to not talk about anything during the battle or after. So I'm really trying to not tease. But stating all of that, Gareth, why don't you just jump right into it?
Thanks, Craig. And I think maybe before we get into the battle details, I think it's pretty important that we set the context, given this was quite a intense period of diplomacy and military activities in Europe as a whole, right until the downfall of Napoleon. So this entire era is part of the Revolutionary Wars. Now, prior to this, in 1802, you have the War of the Second Coalition coming to an end when Britain and France now have signed the Peace of Amiens. It was a treaty that had been signed by the Bonapartist France, though keep in mind, right now, Napoleon, when this peace was signed, was not the emperor of the French. He was the first consul. And, from Britain. And again, as with a lot of uh, diplomacy done by Napoleon, which never really was a strong suit, it led to the entire rearmament and building up tensions between France and England specifically. And this was due to in part that Napoleon was encouraging revolts against the British in the Caribbean, which was under their control and affected British sea lanes. He wanted an Egyptian expedition too, and believed that he just needed to send about 10 to 15,000 soldiers, and the the Suez Canal and the strategic, sorry, not the Suez Canal, but the entire country is his, and therefore he controls the trade. And it's a big severance to the British resources in the East. And at the same time, parts of the um, treaties clauses included the demobilization of French troops from Italy and allowing the Italian states to kind of govern themselves. Instead, what he decides to do, he annexes Piedmont into France, and he also creates the Batavian and Helvetic Republic. So the Batavian Republic is what we know as the Low Countries of Belgium, Netherlands. It was one of the theaters that France fought for in the War of the First Coalition against the coalition that tried to stamp out the revolutionary forces, and the Helvetic Republic, which is Switzerland. And they were governed more as French client states based on French constitution that he obviously would have approved of. This no doubt really enraged the British. And Britain, on the other hand, was expected to return a lot of territories, except for Ceylon and Trinidad, to their respective previous owners, such as Minorca in Spain and Malta to the Order of St. John, which also meant that France was gonna stay out of Naples and Egypt. However, both knew that this is not going to happen. Malta is highly, and Egypt were very strategic for the British. And Napoleon does not want to lose his hold in northern Italy. And they started, trying to play Russia against each other, both trying to woo Russia in 1803. And, because Russia was apparently interested in Malta. Now, this really sounds odd to me since, Malta is probably a few thousand kilometers from the nearest Russian border. But yeah. So this was really the build-up to the cause of war, with Britain starting to become antagonistic to France within just 1.5 years of a peace treaty being signed. Now, what Napoleon does is he decides to legitimize his rule. And in a ceremony which was attended by the Pope, considering how much he and the fourth Pope fought for a few years prior, and in northern Italy, I'm a bit surprised. We had Napoleon crown himself as the Emperor of the French. I'm just bringing up an image. Is the image visible, Craig?
Yeah, yeah, it's up.
Yeah. So this is the very famous photo of Napoleon crowning himself as the Emperor of the French. And can I just add that I really like that? He crowns himself instead of having a religious figure crown himself.
I mean, it's one of the most famous moments in his career when the Pope was about to crown him. He grabs it and then puts it on his own head to make kind of a political statement within itself. It's a hell of a moment.
True enough. I really like it again. That's just me. Now, he crowned himself on 2nd December 1804, and then had a lavish ceremony where some of the people we'll be talking about were made marshals of the empire. Now, this really infuriated the Austrian and Russian emperors in particular, because they did not consider Napoleon as an equal. He's a byproduct of the disgusting French Revolution.
He's not a
He
blue
is not
blood.
given, yeah, he's not had the divine right of rule by, how our families have. So that really kind of infuriated him. But the trigger for the war actually took place in 1805, when Napoleon crowned himself as the King of Italy. And the Italian city-states of Genoa, Parma, and Piacenza kind of recognized this. So northern Italy is pretty much under French control. This was the last straw. It threatens Austrians' possessions as well. and has cut off Naples from the mainland of Europe. So they enter negotiations with the British. And that's where the third coalition is formed without really the French knowing or there being any declaration of war. What is Napoleon doing in the meantime? The guy has assembled his army in camps along the northern coast of France for an invasion of England. And this is where he's also renamed it the La Grande Armée. And he has about 7 corps ready. So there are like around 200,000 men he's mustered, which he thinks will be more than enough to invade Britain and, subjugate that nation. Once
For that
Britain's down,
time, yeah, that's a lot. For that time period, that's a hell of an army. Yeah.
true enough. And this is also where he will reorganize his army, but I'd like to get into that, when we come to the battle per se. But one of the main things is he's created corps, right? The ever-present corps that we talk so much about in our Pacific and World War II series. And they are just kind of waiting for, mustering of the resources of ships so that he can punch through the British Channel Fleet and land his men. However, he gets word that the coalition has been formed and they have already started their advance. And this came in the form of an Austrian army under General. So this is the map of the third coalition, I might add. So you can see it's pretty much the United Kingdom, Sweden, Russia, the Austrian Empire, and Hanover, since Britain was ruled by the Hanoverian kings, and Naples. It's pretty much going to be France fighting on land, and you just have Bavaria as the only other real land power contributing troops to the cause, because Spain is going to play a role in the naval theater. Now, what everyone assumed was Napoleon is going to repeat his moves of the previous year. They believe that he's going to focus on, northern Italy, which is what he did in 2 previous wars, in the wars of the first and second coalition. That Archduke Charles, the brother of the Austrian Emperor, and I might add one of the most talented commanders of this era, he was given 95,000 troops and was to defend northern Italy around Mantua and the Adige River. And it also had Archduke Ferdinand John had 23,000 men to secure the Tyrol. So they're ensuring the Austrian Empire keeps in contact with its possessions in northern Italy. And they assume that the French are going to go with this northern Italy and to the Danube towards Vienna. However, this is where they completely underestimated Napoleon and the speed of his response, because at the same time, a 70,000 strong Austrian army under General Mack wants to secure the Rhine and the forest regions that separate France and the Empire. And he invades the Kingdom of Bavaria, which is a French, protectorate. And the hope was that, since they are part of the Holy Roman Empire, they're going to fight for the emperor. But, well, the Holy Roman Empire had its own problems. That the Bavarian army actually had retreated from the advancing Austrians, and they actually centered themselves away to link up with the French. Now, what Napoleon does is, when he finds out about this, as you can see on this map, is he moves his army south from the northern coast of France, and they assemble at the River Rhine. Now you have Marshal Murat's corps over here is to make feint attacks towards General Mack's army, just to kind of give the impression that, hey, the French are going to cross from here. You got to focus your forces and draw them away. Because as Mac moved in further, he was cut off from the Allied armies because there was a pretty large Russian army marching in, but it takes time for hundreds of thousands of soldiers to march the breadth of the European continent. And despite Napoleon does have the rest of the corps, so Marshal Soult, the corps on the Soult, Davout, Bernadotte, etc. All of them take a wide outflanking march, as you can see on the map here, and cut off the Austrian line of retreat. It is only around October Mac realizes, after a month of advances into this area, that he's in a really precarious position. He launches multiple offenses. The first one happening on October 8th, where you had the Battle of Wertingen, which was a campaign that was between one of my favorite marshals. So you had Murat and Lanz isolate and destroy a Austrian corps. They just suffer about 320 casualties, inflicting over 3,500 on the Austrians. And this action convinced Mac to operate on the northern bank of the Danube instead of trying to go back. And then, on further compounding his errors, he stumbles again into another defeat, where you have the Battle of Gunsberg, which takes place the next day. And again, the Austrians suffer another 2,000 casualties for 1/3 French. So as you can see, he's slowly hemorrhaging troops. And then on, the final decisive moment happened in the middle of the month, 16th to 19th of October, is when the armies under Napoleon, with the corps of Marshal Ney, trapping the Austrian army in a pincer. And that is what happens at Ulm over here, where Mac and his army is completely surrounded, and he tries to hold off because he knows that a large Russian army is approaching. But I think when they realize that the Russians will not reach, when the Russians are around 160 to 170 miles away, he's out of supplies, and the men don't have a will to fight. And you have this famous image of General Mack surrendering his army. Now, this is a big loss of manpower because in this entire campaign of about 3 weeks, Napoleon has completely defeated an entire Austrian army, which would at full strength be around 60,000 men. And he's now struck a big blow against the coalition. What he continues to do is, with the victory of Ulm around here, he starts to march on to Vienna to try to pursue the Russian army, defeat this incoming Russian army. The main continental forces that is arrayed against him are destroyed, and there's nothing left for them. But he goes up against General Mikhail Kutuzov, who is a very experienced battlefield commander, but he's pretty cautious. And he right now knows that his men are completely exhausted after, marching from Russia all the way into Austria. And he's now outnumbered, with Mac's army being out of the equation. He starts to retreat and even lets Vienna fall. And then towards the turn of, as we approach December, he slips into Olmutz, which is somewhere in the modern day Czech Republic, where he's joined by, reinforcements from both the Austrian army and the Russian armies as well, which now gives him numerical superiority against Napoleon. Napoleon, on the other hand, is kind of in a furious mood. He is now far from home. His supply lines have also become extended. So he has to, you know, leave units along his line of advance to ensure that the frontline units are going to be supplied. And he wants to now force a decisive battle much quicker than, sooner rather than later. Otherwise, he feels like, he's going to lose the initiative and overwhelming numbers will turn up against him. But he does get very lucky in one regards. The emperor of Russia, Alexander the First, he's kind of young and naive at the moment, I would say, and eagerly is that glory seeker on the battlefield. And I don't think he considers Napoleon much of a great commander. So he is pushing Kutuzov to attack, whereas the veteran general does want to, hold off, prepare, and then consider an attack. But when you have two monarchs, that is the Austrian emperor and the Russian emperor, what can you really do if those two guys decide to attack? Now, Craig, I think you read a little bit of Kutuzov. Maybe you'd like to speak about him and also the four emperors.
Sure. Here, I'll share a picture of him if you don't mind.
Sure.
Okay. Just making sure you can see him.
Yep.
All right. So General Mikhail Kutuzov, he was one of Russia's most distinguished commanders, and he had a long and decorated military career before said Battle of Austerlitz. He was born in 1745 into a noble military family. He was educated at the Imperial Artillery and Engineering School. He quickly rose through the ranks due to his remarkable intelligence and skill. He first saw real action in the Russo-Turkish Wars against the Ottoman Empire. That's in 1768 to 1774, and then again in 1787 to 1792. He served under a legendary general at the time, Alexander Suvorov, where he distinguished himself in battles such as the capture of Ochakov and the storming of Izmail. He was wounded
Can I just
multiple.
add
Yeah.
one thing? General Suvorov was considered like, the best general in the world before the rise of Napoleon. And it's quite interesting that Suvorov in I think 1798 or 99 had said, because by then he had fallen out of favor with he was falling out of favor with the Russian monarchy, that he actually said that Napoleon is going to be one of the greatest generals of all time. And
Well, there you
Suvorov
go.
is a guy that's won over 40, 50 battles, if I'm not mistaken.
Damn. Well, he certainly was legendary. Kutuzov would be wounded multiple times, losing vision in one eye, but continuing his service. His strategic insight and ability to maneuver troops efficiently earned him a lot of promotions. By the late 1790s, Kutuzov became the key military leader and diplomat for the Russians. He served as a governor for Finland and later an ambassador to the Ottoman Empire, where he helped negotiate peace treaties favorable to Russia. However, he would fall out of favor with Tsar Alexander I, who distrusted his cautious approach to warfare. Despite this, Alexander appointed him commander of the Russian forces in the Third Coalition against Napoleon in 1805 that we see here. And I won't say anything more because I don't want to give away more of the history.
He does play a big role in the war. Maybe would you like to speak about our emperors since they're the namesake of the battle?
Which one do you want me to start with?
Perhaps we could start with the Allied emperors, the coalition emperors for now.
All right, let's go with let me find a picture of Mr. Alexander. Whoop. Alexander. Alexander, or Emperor Alexander the First of Russia, he would rule from 1801 onwards, and he had a complex and formative career leading up to said Battle of Austerlitz. He was born in 1777. He was the grandson of Catherine the Great, and he was well educated under the influence of liberal-minded tutors, including the Swiss philosopher Frédéric César de la Harpe. This gave him Enlightenment ideals, though he later adopted more conservative policies, because obviously he's a royal. They all do that. Alexander ascended the throne in March of 1801 after the assassination of his father, Emperor Paul I. Though he was likely not directly involved, his reign began under the shadow of this palace coup. Initially, he pursued reforms, modernizing the administration and promoting limited liberalization. However, he maintained the autocratic control, balancing reformist ambitions with the realities of ruling a vast empire. In foreign policy, Alexander initially sought peace, but soon would find himself clashing with Napoleon's expanding influence. Thus, this brings us to 1805 when he joins the Third Coalition, and that brings us up to date, I would say. I don't want to give any more.
Yeah, and I guess the last Holy Roman Emperor, my dad.
And so we're going to be talking about our next emperor, which is a little complicated. So it's Emperor Francis the Second of Austria. That's from 1792 to 1806, but he's also the first emperor. Okay, sorry. He's the first emperor of Austria. So that makes him Francis the First in that accord, but he also becomes the king of Hungary, Croatia, Bohemia, and he serves as the first president of the German Confederation following its establishment later on in 1815.
That's a lot of titles.
Yeah, but so technically he's the first and second emperor, though, of Austria, given some events that'll happen. I won't get into that. He's obviously one of the key opponents to Napoleon during said Battle of Austerlitz. He was born in 1768, and he was raised in a highly conservative environment, as one would imagine, shaped by the experiences of his uncle, Emperor Joseph II, and his father, Emperor Leopold II. He would develop a cautious and reactionary approach to governance. He became the Holy Roman Emperor and ruler of Austria in 1792, just as the French Revolutionary Wars were kicking off. He became determined to resist the revolutionary aspects of France, and he led Austria in the first and second coalitions against France. Despite early victories, he suffered major defeats, notably at Rivoli, which we covered, and Marengo, that's in 1800, which forced Austria to sign the Treaty of Lunéville, and this would cede significant territory to France. By 1805, Napoleon's growing power alarmed Francis, leading him to join the Third Coalition, and that brings us to where we are now. Do you want me to talk about Emperor Napoleon since he's the third emperor? Or?
Yeah, might as well. I'll just take over some of the key marshals who we're going to be talking about before we get into the Allied and French plans.
All right. Here, let me bring up the extravagant painting of Napoleon when he is crowned emperor. It's pretty ridiculous as a painting, to be honest. For those who don't know, Napoleon Bonaparte's military career before Austerlitz in 1805 was marked by rapid promotions, strategic brilliance, and key victories that established him as history's one of history's greatest commanders. A lot would argue, probably the greatest. He was born in 1769 on the island of Corsica. He's not French, which always surprises people, I find. Napoleon was trained at a French military academy and he became an artillery officer. His first major success was during the Siege of Toulon, that's in 1793, where he played a crucial role in recapturing the city from the British. This earned him a promotion to brigadier general. He would later suppress the royalist uprising in Paris in 1795 with the famous quote, with just a whiff of grape shot, securing his rise in politics and military circles. In 1796, he took command of the French army in Italy, where he conducted a brilliant campaign against Austria, winning the decisive battles of Lodi, Alcol, and of course, the one we covered, Rivoli. His victories forced Austria to sign the Treaty of Campo Formio, and seeking further glory, he led an Egyptian campaign in 1798 to defeat the Mamluks at the Battle of the Pyramids, but he would suffer a naval disaster at the Battle of the Nile, another episode we have covered. Returning to France, he seized power in the coup of the 18 Brumaire, becoming the first consul, and then he crushed Austria at Marengo and solidified his rule. In 1804, he famously crowned himself as Emperor of the French, and well, like you said, after that, he had built the Grande Armée, and this is going to be bringing us right up to this point.
Sure. Thanks, Craig. Uh, so yeah, I think now that we talked about the emperors and the key Russian general, I'll just take some time to just mention a few of the important marshals and his commanders because they play a key role for
Mhm.
his upcoming victory. Uh, is the screen visible?
Yeah, just a second. It takes a while. Yeah, it's invisible.
Yeah. So we now have Marshal Davout, known as the Iron Marshal, renowned for instilling a lot of discipline into his men and a passionate fighter during the Revolutionary Wars. He was, it was quite surprising when he was made a marshal, given that he did not have any experience over, beyond that of a brigadier general. But he would be one of those few marshals, I would add, that would be able to handle independent command successfully. Quite a few of Napoleon's marshals could never do that. He was one of the rare few who could. And he would later share a really passionate hatred for a future enemy of France, the King of Sweden, for events that we will cover in a future episode. Then, other key marshals is obviously we have Marshal Murat, the commander of the cavalry, famously flamboyant in his looks,
I was going to
has to
say,
look
for
good.
people who can't see the podcast, this picture is outstanding.
Yeah, and he was one of the most senior marshals when Napoleon crowned himself and created the empire, the marshals of the empire. He was the second one, so he did have technically a lot more seniority over the other marshals. Uh, a really brave man. He first meets Napoleon, during the Paris Royalist uprising, and helps him, secure that victory for the Directory, which allows and then continues to serve with Napoleon from there. He plays a key role in his Italian campaigns and his Egypt and Marengo, and sorry, the War of the Second Coalition. And if there's one thing it is, that guy just always dressed up extravagantly. It kind of reminds you a bit of Goring in that sense.
Yeah, he has a bit of a Goring in him. Well, I mean, it's because the choice of his military uniform, it's the coloration is like kind of like what Goring liked. And
True,
yeah, yeah.
but undeniably one of the best cavalry commanders and always at the front, but really poor as a strategic commander. Then we had, so just want to talk about Marshal Soult because his unit is going to play a key role. He was a sergeant, drill sergeant in the army of France when the Revolutionary Wars broke out. And even though he was promoted to a lieutenant quite early, and his battalion in the Pyrenees front had a baptism of fire, which saw about 50% of them become casualties. But he was praised. He serves in the staff of General Lefebvre, another fellow marshal of his, he's not present in this battle though, and he proves himself to be an extremely able staff officer and divisional general, brigadier general, sorry, leading Lefebvre's crack brigade. He gets injured in the in 1799, and he has quite an agonizing time in recovery, is freed and returns to France. And he's put in charge of one camp in the planned invasion of England before he's made a marshal. And this man was a drill instructor by nature. And he kept drilling his men so hard that even Napoleon questioned, like, aren't you going a bit too tough on these guys? But it does lead to the best trained corps of the French army. And the men had a nickname for him, Bras de Fer or Iron Arm. And then the last is Marshal Lance. So he is my favorite marshal, I will add. I won't even deny that. And one of the few guys who could actually command independently. A really aggressive commander by nature and personality. And he'll play a role securing an entire flank. And he also has a lot of enemies. So Marshal Soult's Murat and Bessiers, who are also present in this battle, are some guys he just hates. That he actually felt that Soult insulted him on the eve of battle and demanded to fight a duel with him. So you
Oh,
really
damn.
are. He was a hothead, like really hot-headed, but he was a very brave soldier who served as a grenadier in the Napoleonic Wars in Italy. And that's where at the battles of Arcole at Lodi, he was supposedly the first guy to cross to wade across the river onto the Austrian battery line. At Arcole, he was actually being dressed up from an injury that he uh, when he hears that the French are retreating in that back and forth battle, he actually leaves the station while not even fully recovered or treated to just lead a fresh counterattack. Nearly dies in Egypt in the siege of Acre, but his men risked their lives to save him, which, if you ask me, that shows what a great commander he is, if your men are willing to do that. So these are the key commanders. Now, as I alluded to earlier in the the podcast, Napoleon has reorganized the army, which is now called La Grande Armée, into the core system. This is kind of a novelty at this point for European warfare, but it's kind of similar to how the Roman legions would actually operate. So the principle that had been in warfare in Europe since the Middle Ages and until now was the concentration of an army, which is why you would probably have seen Middle Age battles. They really never could look at keeping a force of more than 40,000 men at best. So what he's done is he's created a core which in essence is a mini army, and that usually on paper is supposed to be about 15 to 40,000 men, and they will have a couple of brigades of cavalry and artillery. So they can conduct a small independent campaign on their own. They are self-sufficient. They can hold out. And not only are they better trained and equipped compared to the rest of Europe in 1805, they are able to move much faster than any other army on the continent at this time. One, is because obviously their training is superior at this point in time, but they can advance across multiple routes. They can take their supplies from scattered villages along the route. They don't have to rely on one giant supply column. And it also gives the benefit that you don't know where is the main thrust coming from. And they can quickly concentrate when needed for battle. And this is going to be a theme that Napoleon keeps using throughout his military career as emperor. And there were, I would say, also like two kind of special corps, if you would. One is the Imperial Guard, which is the crack and the best unit of the army. It contains, some of the most famous, like the Chachals, the Cheval, and the best infantry and cavalry units of the army. And they are commanded by Marshal Bessiers at this time. And during the Russian campaign, you actually need three marshals for the Imperial Guard. It grows such a size. And then you also had the cavalry reserve, which was under Murat. And that is supposed to be about four to five brigades of cavalry. So that gives him a reserve force of exclusively horsemen that numbers about 20 to 22,000 men. Whereas right now, the Russian and Austrian armies that he's facing is still kind of very outdated in their ways to conduct war. So the Russians are still not even going to get out of this, even after the Napoleonic eras. Is officers are very aristocratic. You buy your commissions, which while it's prevalent at this time, it's pretty much gets phased out starting from the early 19th century. But Russia is going to, continue to have that problem well into, I think, Russo-Japanese War. I think it was still there, right?
Oh yeah, it was very rampant. The Russo-Japanese War. It's a lot of terrible commanders.
Yeah, and I'm pretty sure they just bought their commissions rather than actually
Yep, many of
passed an
them.
exam.
Mm.
Yep. And they never really trained their soldiers, they just kind of like beat the crap out of them. So while hardy folks, they don't have any firing discipline. The Austrian army is kind of in the middle between these two. It's trying to modernize and adapt with Archduke Charles, who's currently in Italy, trying to institute reforms. And he is the best Austrian commander this time, but he's not popular at court. And which is why his reforms are really slow to even gain support, and he's kind of like just been sidelined. And his position was actually taken over by General Mack, I might add.
Psst. Hey you. You ever hear me talk about some great Pacific War movie or documentary like Pearl Harbor Minute by Minute over on Netflix and feel the urge to watch it for yourself? Uh-oh, you live in Japan and your Netflix doesn't have it? Must suck to be you.
Sucks to be me right now.
Oh wow, season 4 of Demon Slayer is out. Oh wait, I can't watch it on Canadian Netflix, but it's over on Japan Netflix? Whatever will I do?
Oh no, no.
Being blocked from regional content? With private internet access, you too can watch Demon Slayer Season 4 by switching your IP address to Japan.
Yes! Hell yeah!
Why stop with Japan? With private internet access, you can change your IP address to over 84 different countries and every single US state, giving you access to region-restricted content all over the world.
Nice.
Many websites and services like Netflix are only accessible depending on your physical location, but private internet access helps you overcome these restrictions. Think about it, without private internet access, it's like paying for a TV series and missing out on the latest season. Shots fired, Demon Slayer on Canadian Netflix.
Is that like a personal attack or something?
Ever fear people are gonna find your Google searches?
Banzai! Banzai! Banzai!
FBI, open up!
Private internet access makes sure that those Google searches remain a buried secret, as private internet access encrypts your internet access and has a no logs policy. Think you're safe with the local coffee shop's free Wi-Fi? No, you are certainly not. Private internet access gives you more privacy features than any other software and real-time protection from malware and trackers, giving you peace of mind knowing those Google searches remain seen by you and you alone. Private internet access has a no-log policy that they've defended in court, which means they are not storing any of your browsing data. Hey, are you like me using different devices under one household? Private internet access is available on all platforms and protects an unlimited amount of devices at the same time. I personally use private internet access to unblock movies and TV series from all across the globe, and I sleep easier writing scripts for my YouTube channel and others knowing my data is secure. Look, this is a no-brainer. Sign up with my link in the description of this video to get 83% off, plus 4 months for free, so it ends up being only around $2 per month. Signing up for private internet access is risk-free. There's a 30-day money-back guarantee, and 24/7 customer support is available. So don't forget to click www.piavpn.com/the Pacific War Channel, and a big thanks to Private Internet Access for sponsoring this video.
So this is the like the army structure I just wanted to speak about. So you can see, I could hear rather, Napoleon has a far superior army in terms of the quality of his men. Even though he's going to be slightly outnumbered, going to have way fewer guns, he, pound for pound, his men are far better. Now, so as you said, Greg, the Battle of Austerlitz takes place near the village of Austerlitz, which is now in the Czech Republic. So it's like a map on the modern day borders for us to just see. Now, this is just a battleground of the map, like the battlefield. And this is very important because Napoleon is also playing a bit of deception with the Allied commanders at this time. He needs to, get the battle on his terms, but he has to also bait them into a trap. So he's actually feigned, sent messages to the enemy camp saying he might be willing to negotiate to kind of lull them into a false sense of security, and as he withdraws, around the village of Austerlitz. And to kind of also, he says like, we are very weak and everything. And to kind of also entice them even more, one of the key things that he does is around the center of this map here where my cursor is moving is the Pratzen Heights. This is the dominant feature on this battlefield, which is just a gentle hill about 30 to 40 meters tall. And obviously you control the height with your artillery. You are going to dominate the battlefield, and the battlefield is flanked at the northern edge around the Santon Hill and the village of Bosenitz here. That is kind of like the northern boundaries of what would be this battle. And then you had Sokolnitz and Telnitz at the south. So these are the parameters. What Napoleon has done is he's actually withdrawn, even though he had the advantage of coming to the battlefield first. He withdraws his forces away from the Pratzen Heights and abandons it completely, and allows the allies to take over. And you have Marshal Lannes Corps deployed on Napoleon's left wing. Bernadotte, Bessières, and Soult are deployed in the center. And he's currently around on his right flank, around Sokolnitz Castle and the village of Telnitz. He has a small force, a few thousand men. It's a very weakened right flank. This is the bait. He wants that the allies to see that his right flank is very weak. And then he knows that they will go for it. They will try to attack and try to, outflank him and move. And that's exactly what he wants. So this is going to be like, if you were to even compare to like Alexander's battlefields tactics, this is going to be the anvil that is going to hold the enemy forces off. And to kind of ensure that this weak flank does not give in, he's ordered Marshal Davout's Third Corps to march up. And they are currently in Vienna. And on the day of, they have to cover around 110 kilometers in 2 days to join the battle.
Oh, wow. That's a hell of a march.
Yeah. And so if you do mind, I'll just go get into the disposition of the armies, the order of battle. So you had the French Imperial Guard, which is about 5,500 infantry and cavalry under Marshal Bessières. The First Corps under Marshal Bernadotte, which had around 13,000 infantry and cavalrymen. The Third Corps of Davout is only marching with about 6,000 men, of which 1,000 are cavalry. The Fourth Corps, which is the single largest unit on this battlefield from both sides, under Marshal Soult, has almost 24,000 soldiers. And I might just add, his first division is under General Saint-Hilaire, and the second division is under General Van Damme. And these were some of the best divisional commanders in the Grand Army. I mean, Van Damme was one of the most brutal soldiers, it seems, that Napoleon had said, if I had to invade Lucifer in hell, he's leading my vanguard. And the Fifth Corps under Marshal Lannes has about 13,000 men, and that anchors the left flank of Napoleon. And then his reserves has, 7,500 horsemen of Murat, and, almost 6,000 grenadiers of General and later Marshal Nicolas Oudinot. In total, Napoleon has around 72,000 soldiers and 151 cannons scattered throughout his forces. The Austrians and Russians, so they have a sizable force on their right flank per se, which is opposite Napoleon's left, which consists of the Russian Advance Guard and the Imperial Guard. And that's between them, that's about 25,000 men. And the Advance Guard is led by General Peter Bagration, who is also going to be a well-discussed character in a future episode of the Napoleonic series. And then you have about 5 columns of units which are kind of centered on the Pratzen Heights, that the dominating feature that Napoleon has given up. And between all of this, they are about 53,000 men, which are divided into the Austrian advance guard, the first column, second column, third column, and the fourth columns. And then you have a cavalry reserve. All in total, the coalition army mustered to around 83 to 84,000 men on the battlefield. And they have almost 280 guns. So it doesn't really look good on paper for the French emperor. And this battle occurs in December 1805, which marks about a year from his anniversary as the Emperor of France. It is fitting. You have him, fight for the battle that could decide the future of the empire on his anniversary. So the battle begins at 8 a.m. So there is still a heavy mist on the battleground, but since the coalition commanders know that the Napoleon's right flank is weak, you have the Austrian advance guard under General Kienmeyer launches assault here. So this is defended by the Third Line Regiment, and they were fighting from the villages and everything. You're not having the standard long lines that we might be accustomed to. The guys are using cover and slowly withdrawing as the regiment is taking quite a beating. And at the same time, when General Kienmeyer's guards advance guard looks to be overwhelming the defenders here, the first brigade of Marshal Davout's corps manages to come and reinforce the line here. Now, these guys have been marching, as I said, 110 kilometers in the last 2 days, and they just literally have to march into the battle zone right now. But one thing that you can say Napoleon never was, he was not indecisive. Allied command, they were indecisive. Because of the mist and confusion, they don't actually start to take this large attack of the columns to come, roll up the French right and then, move and cut out the, French from the rear. They kind of just wait for an hour or something to just sort out the confusion, which no doubt helped Davout's men come and strengthen the line. So, it took by around 9 a.m., the center columns from the Pratzen Heights start to move up to, per the plan, conduct the encirclement of the French army. And while this is going on, Napoleon is located around a hill here, and he starts to finally notice that the Allies are thinning out the center, which is exactly what he wanted to do, because his plan was, as they weaken the center, he will use his center forces and cut the Allied army in two and defeat each in detail. And at this moment, he orders General Soult to Bernadotte to commence the advance. And because of the mist, the Allied commanders had not even seen these units off. To them, suddenly they're just in complete shock as almost 10 to 12,000 French soldiers are just marching onto the Pratzen Heights. That General Kutuzov actually has to utilize the fourth column soldiers, which is the last unit that was supposed to go for the encirclement, to form a defensive line on the Pratzen Heights. And you see a big clash here with the bayonets and being used, since the muskets fire had completely exhausted the ammunition of these guys. And at the same time, on the left, Marshal Lannes and General Bagration are fighting for the village of Austerlitz. And while Bagration does try to launch an outflanking attack, a group of cannon, battery of cannons that is on the Santon Hill over here, managed to stop the advance and force those men to retreat. And then, Murat has moved up, and 6 regiments of heavy cuirassier cavalry, along with lance, cavalry, and infantry, charge, and they force the Allied right wing of the battle and secure this side. Now, as Napoleon also now unleashes General Oudinot's division onto the Pratzen Heights. Grand Duke Constantine and General Liechtenstein launch forward with the cavalry reserve and the Russian Imperial Guard. That Napoleon actually, on the rare occasion, does commit the Imperial Guard to battle because they completely outflank a division of Bernadotte's army, a regiment, cutting it down, and that regiment loses its eagle. No, I don't think the Napoleonic soldiers fought for the eagle as much as the Romans did.
Yeah, I was gonna say it's not the same kind of situation. Yeah,
True enough, but it was, you had a clash of the guards units, which is quite rare because
that
these
is
are
rare.
the elites of the elites fighting it out. And in this, the French army is victorious. And with these forces retreating and with Lannes prior victory on the left flank, half the battlefront of the coalition army is not going to be engaged. And this is when Marshal Soult has 2 of his divisions turn and head south, where the defenders of Telnitz and Sokolnitz with Davout's Third Corps have been holding on to the the position. And it's only here where General Buxhausen, who is the only commander that realizes what is going on, that they are now encircled and trapped, that they have to retreat across these frozen rivers and lakes. And in the carnage, a few dozen men, not the few thousand, are blown apart with the French cannon kind of destroying the ice underneath them. So this is the battle that the battle ends here. And it's quite a decisive victory for the Emperor of France. So Napoleon, he loses about 9,000 men killed or wounded or captured, which is, I think that's about 12% of his army. The Allied casualties were quite staggering. They had between 15 to 18,000 killed and wounded, and a further 12 to 20,000 captured. So it's getting close to about 40 to 50% of their army. They're not a force that can fight anymore. And it was a victory that caused William Pitt, the Prime Minister of England, to, when he heard about this, that he said about a map of Europe, he says, roll up that map. It won't be needed for these 10 years.
It's funny. I know a little bit about William Pitt when it comes to the Opium Wars later.
Yeah, but that is quite prophetic, if you ask me.
Yeah.
Since we know what's going to happen. But, the Battle of the Three Emperors is, Napoleon's first major victory as Emperor of the French. And France and Austria sign a truce on 4th of December, and then you have the Treaty of Pressburg, which is signed on 26th of December, which took Austria completely out of the war. So Austria has to recognize all French conquests from the previous treaties of Campo Formio of 1797 and Luneville in 1801. They also have to further cede land to Bavaria, France's main continental ally, contributing to the land war. They also have to cede land to Württemberg and Baden. They're Napoleon's big allies in the Germans. In Germany, sorry. They have to pay 40 million francs in war indemnities, and also have to cede Venice to the Kingdom of Italy. Oh, that's also Napoleon's domain. And this kind of like, with so much of the big parts of the Holy Roman Empire not under the emperor's control, it actually is what causes Emperor Francis the First to dissolve the Holy Roman Empire after nearly 1,000 years of its existence, because it's just non-existent anymore.
I mean, even before this, it wasn't, not to say it wasn't existed. It's kind of not, I don't know. The Holy Roman Empire is a mess.
It's there's a slight digression. I've been trying to read and understand events about it, and
Oh,
I keep getting lost.
it's a catastrophe to read about. Yeah, it's too much stuff.
Napoleon, on the other hand, was completely elated. This is what he says to his soldiers after the battle. He says, because I'm sorry, I can't pronounce it in French, so I'm just going to go with the English translation. He says, "Soldiers, I am pleased with you." Then, and he wrote with his great rhetoric. He says, "Even at this hour, before this great day shall pass and be lost in the ocean of eternity, your emperor just address you and say how satisfied he is with the conduct of all those who had the good fortune to fight in this memorable battle. Soldiers, you are the finest warriors in the world. The recollection of this day and of your deeds will be eternal. Thousands of ages hereafter, as long as the events of the universe continue to be relate, will it be told that a Russian army of 76,000 men, hired by the gold of England, was annihilated by you on the plains of Olmutz." The guy was good at propaganda.
Yep.
I mean, needed. And this was a battle where actually he did provision a lot of rewards to everybody. So 2 million francs were given to the higher officers, and each soldier was given 200 francs as a booty.
Oof.
And, he was given when pensions were given to the widows of the fallen soldiers. And they also kind of got like a 6,000 franc one-time payment to the generals. And orphan children were adopted by Napoleon from this, and they could use his name Napoleon in their baptismal and family names. And with the indemnity and increased public borrowing, that's how he was able to finance this great outlook.
Yeah, I was gonna say, yeah.
And this is one of the 4 battles which Napoleon never awarded a victory title, which the others were Marengo, Jena, and Friedland. Quite ironic that these were 4 of his 6 greatest victories, if you look at his career.
Yeah.
So the Russian army is now in retreat. They're not out of the war, but they're in full retreat. And they're retreating back to Russia. Austria has been completely humiliated and kicked out of the war. Because discussing a bit of events that take place elsewhere, we have the most significant being the Battle of Trafalgar, which takes place at Cape Trafalgar off the coast of Spain.
Of course.
Where, Nelson wins a decisive battle. If Austerlitz ensured French domination on land for 10 years, Trafalgar ensured British naval dominance for 100 years.
Yeah.
And this was a battle where 27 British ships of the line under Vice Admiral Nelson engaged Vice Admiral Pierre Villeneuve and his 33 Franco-Spanish ships of the line. And despite being significantly outgunned, it was about 2,600 guns on the Franco-Spanish fleet to 2,100 British. They win a crushing victory, with most of the Franco-Spanish ships being captured or lost, not in the battle, but due to a storm that took place in the immediate aftermath, with Britain not losing a single ship. So this would ensure that Britain will continue to fight and be dominant on the sea. It's not going to be challenged. And in the long term, as we discuss further into the Napoleonic era, we can see that this is going to have a disastrous consequence for the French Empire. And Napoleon actually only receives word of this defeat after his victory at Austerlitz.
Yeah, that's pretty bittersweet.
It is. And we would also see that in the Italian theater, uh, General Sonsier and Marshal Massena had, you know, fought there, and they kind of also occupied the kingdom of Naples and, pinned down Archduke Charles's army, which also resulted in French victories in that theater of war. But the immediate question that everyone had after the Battle of Austerlitz, what is Prussia going to do?
Hmm.
But Russia is also going to be one of our big powers, and they're going to make quite a decisive decision in the upcoming few weeks. But that's where I would end it for, Battle of Austerlitz.
All right. But before we let the audience go, just want to repeat, if you'd like to further support our channel, please check out the YouTube membership at the Pacific War channel over on YouTube, or you can check out the Patreon over at www.patreon.com/the Pacific War channel. By joining either of these, you get access to the exclusive podcast series. You get early access to all the content I make and voting rights for the subjects I will tackle next. The latest episode is how the Sicilian Mafia aided the Allies during World War II. Uh, I'll mention it here because I think only the people on Patreon know this. I had put up a poll a while back asking if people would be up for kind of a weird idea where I would do a mini series doing kind of like an alternate history of the Pacific War. And that's not like how Japan would win the Pacific War or anything like that. It's just I thought there was some kind of key moments that would be funny to tinker around with. And it's
Do you mind maybe giving a little teaser about what these events could be?
yeah, so people are obsessed with different outcomes for Pearl Harbor. And there's multiple things that could happen at Pearl Harbor. And there's actually a lot of alternate history books, like Henry Turtledove, for example, who's written about what I would call incorrect predictions of basically a lot of people think that, let's say, the third wave, if it hit Pearl Harbor, would it have knocked out everything? No, of course not. But what I want to write about, and I'll tease it here, I really looked at what is the most significant differences that could happen at Pearl Harbor. Because what the Japanese were throwing at Pearl Harbor meant that they couldn't take out things like the oil fields, for example, because they're using, dive bombing aircraft. They couldn't destroy the oil tanks, despite what a lot of people think. And I can go into depth as to why that wouldn't happen. But I want to ask the question. There was a chance hours before they arrived that Admiral Husband Kimmel finds out. What does he do? At this point, Nagumo had direct orders. He was to turn back unless I think it was under 4 hours or less they were like en route to Pearl Harbor. So within that time frame, I want to have it that Husband Kimmel doesn't want his forces to be taken unaware at port. He wants his ships to be at sail. So I'll have him try to sail out, and during that interlude, Nagumo, with standing orders to keep going, will attack the American Pacific Fleet. This also incorporates two aircraft carriers that were doing routine missions. One actually can't possibly make it, no matter the time frame. The other one could possibly make it. And well, what would happen if the Americans, and we're talking 1941 December here, tried to fight the Kido Butai, or at least tried to retreat from Hawaii, it would seem, I think it would be a lot more disastrous. And what if Japan hit certain other targets that could have been destroyed at Pearl Harbor, such as Station Hypo, where the Naval Intelligence Services and the cryptanalysts were? What if they got knocked out? So it's things like this that I think might change history.
That's actually quite interesting. I'm game.
Yeah. The only thing is, unlike regular history research, and I have to hand it to Cody at Alternate History Hub, it takes so much more effort to research this kind of stuff because you have to account for any type of variable that might come up. And it's taken me a while. It's going to be a little difficult to write. But I'm gonna take some things for granted, like the rest of the early invasions of the Pacific War. I'm gonna keep as is. It's just the force that goes after Pearl Harbor. That's where like what would you call it? The critical point will start, and then from there things will dramatically change. Because is there a battle of Midway? I don't know. What about the battle for Port Moresby? I think under these circumstances, that's actually going to be very different. I don't think we're going to have a Coral Sea engagement, and I think the maximum Japanese operations that they had planned for, like, I don't know, attacking places like Fiji, for example, might actually happen. So it's going to be different, but I don't want people to get the idea that this is how Japan wins World War II. It by far is not. It's just going to be a very different outlook, and I'm going to try and base it in reality. So yeah, that's it. It's coming soon for members.
I'm definitely looking forward to that.
All right. This is a very interesting episode. And I think at some point, because we're going to cover a lot of Napoleonic era battles, once we've covered enough, I think I might make a supercut that'll be the Napoleonic Wars. And it'll be probably, each one will be like 10 hours long, mind you, but it'll be fun. Yeah.
Well, I mean, there's so many series that you could just make out of it if we cover even just the major events. And I'm definitely looking forward to, going through this entire.
Yeah. But until next time, over and out.